Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became a sorcerer apprentice under Wong. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The wind that whipped across the rooftop was a cold, indifferent thing. It tugged at the lapels of Izuku Midoriya's black gakurin, a cruel mimicry of the hand that had just been on his shoulder. It felt like an eternity ago, but the scent of ozone and something impossibly vital still lingered in the air, a ghost of the man who had been there. The symbol of peace. All Might. His idol had just deflated, not just in body, but in spirit, taking every single one of Izuku's painstakingly constructed dreams with him. It's not bad to dream. But you need to be realistic. The words echoed in the hollow space of his skull, a perfect, soul-crushing reverberation. They were worse than Kaken's explosive taunts, worse than the pitying looks from his teachers, worse even than the doctor's sterile diagnosis all those years ago. Those were obstacles. This was a final judgment, delivered from the highest court in the land. The case was closed. Quirkless. Useless. Dreamer. Izuku's knuckles were white where he gripped the safety railing. The metal was cold and solid, a stark contrast to the liquid dread churning in his gut. Far below, the city of Muzurifa hummed with life, a vibrant tapestry of quirks and ambitions that he was now, officially, barred from. He could see tiny cars flowing like blood cells through the city's arteries, could hear the distant, cheerful chime of a crosswalk signal. A world moving on without him. Then, a plume of black smoke billowed into the sky a few blocks away. It was thick and angry. An explosion followed, a deep boom that vibrated through the soles of his worn red sneakers. A villain attack. The old Izuku, the Izuku from an hour ago, would have been a blur of motion. He'd have been scrambling for the stairs, his mind already alight, notebook clutched in his hand, muttering analysis and predictions. His legs would have carried him there before he'd even made a conscious decision to go. But his legs didn't move. They felt like lead, anchored to the rooftop by the sheer gravity of his failure. What's the point? The new, broken voice in his head whispered. What could you possibly do? Be realistic. He just watched. Watched as the smoke climbed higher, as the distant wail of sirens began to crescendo. He watched as heroes likely converged on the scene. He watched as his own defining instinct, to run towards the danger, to help, to do something, was snuffed out by the cold, hard truth. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't even a candidate. He was just a boy on a roof, watching the world burn. The walk home was a funeral procession for a dream. Izuku's feet shuffled over the pavement, each step a monumental effort. The world had lost its color. The bright, flashy posters of heroes plastered on shop windows seemed to mock him. The confident smiles of Endeavor, the cool readiness of Best Jeanist, the cheerful wave of Empty Lady. They were all images from a world he could look at but never enter. A party he was watching through a soundproof window. His mind was a maelstrom of shame and despair. He thought of his mother, of the way she had sobbed and apologized to him when he was 4, as if his quirklessness was her fault. He'd always tried to be strong for her, to smile and say, "It's okay, Mom! Because I'm going to be a hero like All Might." He felt a fresh wave of nausea. He hadn't just been lying to himself, he had been lying to her. He took a shortcut through a series of narrow back alleys, wanting to avoid the crowds that were now gathering to watch the commotion from the villain attack. He didn't want to see their excited faces, hear their speculation. He just wanted to go home, crawl into his All Might-themed bed, and maybe never get out. The alley was damp and smelled of stale ramen and rain. The high walls of the surrounding buildings cast it in a premature twilight, the brickwork stained with grime. It was a forgotten little vein of the city, and it was empty. Perfect. He was halfway through when a sound ahead made him freeze. It was a choked sob, followed by a man's voice, high and frantic. "Just give me the wallet. And the purse. Now. Don't make me do something I'll regret." Izuku's head snapped up. Pinned against the far wall were a young couple and their small daughter, who couldn't have been more than 6. The little girl was burying her face in her mother's leg, tiny shoulders shaking. The father stood slightly in front of them, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. Blocking their path was a man. He was lanky and disheveled, dressed in a stained hoodie and jeans. He held no weapon, no knife, no gun. But the air around him was wrong. It seemed to shimmer and distort, like heat haze on asphalt, but it was accompanied by a low, dissonant hum. Reality around the man's hands was glitching, the bricks behind him momentarily pixelating before snapping back into focus. A spatial quirk. An unstable one. Please, the father begged, his voice trembling. Just take it. Don't hurt us. The villain, jittery and clearly out of his depth, gestured erratically. Shut up. Just hurry up. With every motion, the space around his hands warped more violently. A discarded newspaper near his feet flickered out of existence for a second, then reappeared, slightly to the left. Izuku's blood ran cold. He knew about quirks like this. Unstable spatial manipulation was incredibly dangerous. One miscalculation, one surge of adrenaline, and the man could accidentally tear a hole in anything, or anyone. Run, his brain screamed. Get a hero! You can't do anything. You're quirkless. All Might said so. Be realistic. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and inadequacy. He was right. He was useless here. A liability. He should turn around, run as fast as he could, and find someone who could actually help. But then the little girl peeked out from behind her mother's coat. Her eyes, wide and swimming with tears, met Izuku's. In them, he saw a terror so pure, so absolute, that it bypassed every rational thought in his head. It bypassed the despair. It bypassed the shame. It bypassed All Might's final verdict. It was the look of someone who needed a hero, and in that instant, his body moved on its own. Before he could process it, his yellow backpack was off his shoulders. His arm was a blur, fueled by a decade and a half of desperate, hopeless hope. He wasn't aiming for the villain himself. He was aiming for the metal dumpster 10 feet to the man's left. The heavy bag, loaded with textbooks and hero analysis notebooks, sailed through the air and struck the dumpster with a deafening clang. The villain shrieked in surprise, spinning around. Who's there? It worked. The family had a fraction of a second, a tiny window of opportunity. The father grabbed his wife and daughter, pulling them away, scrambling back down the alley. But the villain, panicked and enraged, turned back. His wild eyes locked onto the fleeing family. Get back here! He screamed, his voice cracking. He lunged, not with his feet, but with his quirk. He thrust his hands forward, and the unstable spatial energy surged from him, no longer a subtle shimmer but a tangible, violent wave of distortion. He wasn't in control anymore. Fear was. Izuku watched in horror as the very fabric of the alleyway between the villain and the family began to tear. It didn't rip like paper. It fractured like glass, 1,000 invisible fault lines spiderwebbing through the air. A sound followed, a horrifying noise that was part grinding metal, part tearing canvas, and part something utterly alien that scraped at the inside of his ears. The air grew cold, and the light from the alley entrance bent around the epicenter, creating a nauseating fisheye effect. A shimmering, vertical line of non-color appeared in the air. It was a wound in the world. It wasn't black, it was a pure, terrifying absence. Through it, Izuku could see things that his mind refused to process. Swirling geometries of impossible hues, stars that burned with a cold, dead light, and shapes that moved in the void. The villain stared at what he had created, his face a mask of shock and terror. What did I do? The rift, no wider than a doorway but humming with terrifying potential, was unstable. It pulsed, and a wave of raw dimensional energy lashed out. It wasn't an explosion of fire or force, but of pure wrongness. The villain was caught in the blast, his eyes rolling back in his head as he crumpled to the ground, unconscious. The wave continued, weaker now, and slammed into Izuku. It felt like being hit by a freight train made of static. The world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of screaming color and noise. He was thrown backward, his head connecting with the brick wall behind him with a sickening crack. His vision swam, the edges turning dark. The last thing he saw before unconsciousness claimed him was the shimmering, impossible crack in reality, pulsing like a malevolent heart in the gloom of the alley. Izuku awoke to the gentle patting of a hand on his cheek. It was firm, not frantic. Calm, boy. Wake up, boy. The voice was a low, steady baritone, devoid of any discernible accent but carrying an immense weight of authority. He groaned, his head throbbing in a painful symphony. He blinked, and the grimy alley slowly swam back into focus. He was slumped against the wall, his backpack lying a few feet away, its contents spilled across the dirty concrete. His prized hero analysis for the future, Volume 13, was lying open, its pages fluttering in a faint breeze. Then he remembered. The villain. The family. His eyes snapped open, darting to the center of the alley. The rift was still there. It was smaller now, more contained, but it still shimmered with that same unnatural light, the edges fraying reality like a pulled thread. The unconscious villain lay nearby, groaning softly. The family was gone. He hoped they'd gotten away safely. Standing before the rift was a man. He was the single most out-of-place person Izuku had ever seen. He was a stocky man of Asian descent, with a stern, clean-shaven head and a serious, focused expression. He was dressed not in a hero costume, but in heavy, layered robes of mustard yellow and deep blue, tied with a dark sash. They looked ancient, monastic, and utterly alien to the streets of Muzidafu. The man wasn't looking at Izuku. His entire attention was on the dimensional tear. He raised his hands, and Izuku's breath caught in his throat. Golden light, brighter and more pure than any quirk-based energy he had ever seen, began to trace intricate, geometric patterns in the air before him. Rings and lines of crackling energy formed a complex mandala that spun slowly, emitting a low, harmonic hum. The man's fingers moved with a practiced, deliberate grace, like a surgeon or a master calligrapher. By the hoary hosts of Hoggoth, the man muttered, his voice a low incantation, let this wound be mended. Let the veil be restored. He pushed his hands forward. The golden construct of light drifted towards the rift. As it made contact, there was no explosion, no violent collision. The light simply absorbed the tear. It was like watching a seamstress expertly stitch a rip in a piece of fabric. The unnatural edges of the rift were pulled together, the impossible void within sealed away, until all that was left was a final, brilliant spark of gold that winked out, leaving the alley looking mundane and normal once more. The man lowered his hands and let out a long, weary sigh. He looked profoundly annoyed, the way one might look after discovering someone had tracked mud all over a freshly cleaned floor. Only then did he turn his attention to the rest of the scene. His dark, intelligent eyes swept over the unconscious villain, the scattered contents of Izuku's backpack, and finally, settled on Izuku himself, who was still slumped against the wall, staring with wide, disbelieving eyes. The man's gaze was piercing, analytical. Izuku felt stripped bare, as if the man wasn't just looking at him, but through him, weighing and measuring something he couldn't comprehend. He expected the usual dismissal, the pity, or even anger for getting involved. The stranger walked over, his soft-soled boots making almost no sound on the pavement. He knelt down, his expression unreadable. "Are you injured?" he asked, his voice calm and even. Izuku could only shake his head mutely, though the lump forming on the back of it suggested otherwise. The man's eyes flickered to the villain, then back to Izuku. His quirk created a temporary, unstable dimensional fissure. A D-class reality breach. Annoying, but manageable. He said it with the clinical detachment of a mechanic diagnosing a faulty engine. "You threw your bag. A distraction?" "Why?" Izuku swallowed, his throat dry. "The family. He was going to hurt them." The man nodded slowly, his gaze unwavering. He seemed to be looking for something. "You have no quirk." It wasn't a question. It was a simple statement of fact, delivered with the same finality as a doctor's diagnosis. Izuku flinched, the words a fresh stab in a still bleeding wound. He squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the inevitable follow-up. "So you see, it was reckless. You should have left it to the professionals. You could have been killed." But the man said none of those things. Instead, he asked a different question. "And yet you moved. Why?" The question hung in the air, simple and profound. It was the same question All Might had asked, but the context was entirely different. All Might had been looking for a reason to justify passing on his power. This man was looking for something else. Izuku's voice was a raw whisper. "I don't know. I just... my legs just moved. I couldn't just stand there and watch them get hurt. I couldn't. The words tumbled out, the core truth of his being, the one thing that had survived the day's utter devastation. The stranger was silent for a long moment. His stern expression seemed to soften, just a fraction, a barely perceptible shift. He wasn't looking at Izuku's scrawny frame, or his tear-stained face anymore. Izuku had the strangest feeling the man was seeing something else entirely. A light, a color, an energy that was invisible to normal eyes. In that alley, surrounded by filth and the mundane detritus of the city, the man perceived something extraordinary. In the spectrum of souls, where quirks were often loud, bombastic bursts of color, this boy was different. There was no bright flare of a genetic power. There was only a quiet, steady, and intensely brilliant star of pure, unadulterated willpower. It was the unwavering will to protect, the selfless instinct to act. It was a quality that Kamartaj valued above all else, a quality that could bend the very laws of the universe if properly honed. It was the heart of a protector, trapped in the body of a boy who had been told he was worthless. The man stood up, his robe settling around him. He looked down at Izuku, and for the first time, there was something other than annoyance or clinical analysis in his eyes. It was a thoughtful, calculating sort of respect. In your world, the man began, his voice taking on a teacher's cadence, power is a birthright. A genetic lottery. It is given, not earned. Those without it are told they are lesser. Izuku stared up at him, his heart beginning to beat a little faster. You have the heart of a protector, boy, the man continued, his words landing with a weight that pushed all mights out of Izuku's head. But you have the wrong tools for this job. He gestured vaguely at the city around them, at the world of pro-heroes and quirks. You have been trying to fight a fire with a teacup of water. He paused, letting the words sink in. He saw the flicker of understanding, the dawning of a fragile, impossible question in the boy's emerald eyes. There are other paths, the man said, his voice dropping slightly, now filled with a quiet intensity. There are powers not born in your blood, but forged in your mind. Powers drawn from the fabric of the universe itself. It is a harder path. One that requires discipline, study, and a will of iron. But the strength you can gain from it is considerable. He extended a hand. It was not a hand offering a superpower. It was a hand offering a key to a door Izuku never knew existed. There are other ways to be a hero. Would you like to learn? Izuku stared at the outstretched hand, then up at the man's stoic face. The world seemed to fall away. The throbbing in his head, the sting of his scraped knees, the crushing weight of his shattered dreams, it all vanished, replaced by a single, blinding pinpoint of light. It was hope. It was a terrifying, brilliant, and utterly insane hope, but it was real. This man, who had appeared from a tear in reality, and wielded stars in his hands, was not offering him a consolation prize. He was offering him a chance. A different one, but a real one. Tears, hot and unstoppable, began to stream down Izuku's face. They weren't the tears of despair he had shed on the rooftop. They were tears of catharsis, of a dam of misery finally breaking to let a new river flow through. He looked at the strange man, at the impossible magic he had just witnessed, at the lifeline being offered in the grimiest alley in Muzurifu. He tried to speak, to ask a million questions. Who are you? What was that? Is it real? Am I dreaming? But all that came out was a single, choked, desperate word that held all the questions and all the answers within it. How? The single word hung in the grimy air of the alley, a fragile, desperate prayer. How? The stern-faced man, who had just sewn a wound in the world shut with threads of golden light, regarded Izuku with an unblinking gaze. There was no pity in his eyes, only a quiet, unnerving assessment. It was the look of a master craftsman sizing up a raw, unpromising piece of timber, searching for a sturdy grain hidden beneath the splintered surface. The how is the journey, the man stated, his voice a low rumble that seemed to absorb the ambient city noise. The first step is commitment. You will be leaving your world behind, everything you know, everyone you love. The training is rigorous, and there is no guarantee of success. Once you walk this path, there is no turning back to the life you knew. Are you prepared for that? Izuku's mind reeled. Leave everything? His mom? His school? The faint, masochistic hope of seeing Kaken become the #1 hero from a distance? It was a price so steep he could barely comprehend it. He thought of his mother's worried face, of the dinner that was likely waiting for him at home. The thought was a painful anchor, threatening to pull him back down into the crushing gravity of his reality. But what was that reality? A future of mediocrity, of apologetic sighs and averted gazes. A lifetime spent on the sidelines, watching others live the life he ached for. All Might's words, still a fresh, gaping wound, echoed in his ears. You need to be realistic. This man, this impossible man, was offering him something beyond realism. He was offering him magic. Izuku looked at the man's outstretched hand, then back at his serious face. This wasn't a trick. This wasn't a dream. The memory of the rift, the feeling of that alien energy washing over him, was too vivid, too real. This was a choice. A terrifying, monumental choice presented in the filth of a back alley. He could stay, and his life would be exactly what everyone, including the symbol of peace, had told him it would be. Or he could go. He could take this stranger's hand and step into the unknown, chasing a new dream that was wilder and more insane than his first. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the scent of garbage and damp concrete filling his lungs for what felt like the last time. He gave a single, decisive nod. I am. The corner of the man's mouth twitched, the barest hint of a smile. My name is Wong. Wong didn't shake his hand. Instead, he raised his other hand, on which he wore a peculiar two-fingered ring. With a practiced, fluid motion, he began to trace a circle in the air before him. Izuku's jaw dropped. A shower of brilliant orange-gold sparks erupted from Wong's fingertips, trailing in the air like embers from a divine forge. They weren't fading. They were hanging there, solidifying, carving out the circumference of a perfect circle. The air within the circle began to shimmer, not with the violent wrongness of the villain's rift, but with a controlled, beautiful distortion. The image of the opposing brick wall dissolved, replaced by a new scene, as clear and vivid as if viewed through a window. It was a vast, open-air courtyard, built of intricately carved stone and dark wood. The architecture was a stunning fusion of Himalayan monasticism and something far older, with geometric patterns that seemed to fold in on themselves in defiance of perspective. People in robes similar to Wong's moved with quiet purpose across the flagstones. Some were gathered in groups, manipulating shimmering orbs of light between their palms. Others stood alone, performing slow, deliberate martial arts katas that left faint trails of energy in their wake. The sky above was a shade of blue so deep and clear it hurt to look at, and the air that wafted through the portal smelled of crisp mountain air, sandalwood incense, and old, dry paper. This is Kamartaj, Wong said, his voice holding a rare note of reverence. Our fortress. Our school. Your new home. Izuku was speechless, his analytical mind completely short-circuiting in the face of such beautiful impossibility. A portal. A stable, controllable gateway between 2 points in space. The applications, the physics, the sheer energy required. Wait! Izuku yelped, a sudden, frantic thought piercing his all. My mom! I can't just disappear. She'll worry, she'll call the police, she'll think I was kidnapped or... Wong held up a hand, silencing his panicked muttering. You have 2 minutes. Izuku stared at him, then at the portal, then back. 2 minutes. He fumbled in his spilled backpack, his hands shaking so badly he could barely zip it closed. He found a pen and a slightly crumpled page torn from his hero notebook. Kneeling on the dirty ground, he scribbled a messy, frantic note. Mom, something amazing has happened. I've been offered a chance to study abroad. It's a very sudden, once-in-a-lifetime training trip at a highly specialized school. I'm sorry for not telling you sooner, it all happened so fast. Please don't worry. I'm safe, and this is something I have to do. I'll be back soon, stronger than before. I promise. I'll find a way to contact you when I can. Love, Izuku. It was a terrible, flimsy lie, but it was the best he could do. It was better than vanishing without a trace. He folded it carefully, ran back to the entrance of the alley, and slipped it into the mail slot of a neighboring apartment building, praying it would be found and delivered to his address just a few blocks away. He sprinted back to Wong, his heart pounding with a mixture of guilt and exhilarating terror. Okay, he gasped, breathless. I'm ready. Wong nodded once, his expression unchanged. Good. Do not dawdle. Izuku stood at the edge of the portal, the mundane world behind him, a world of magic before him. He took one last look at the grimy alley, the place where his old dream had died and this new, impossible one had been born. Then, with a deep breath that felt like the first breath of a new life, he stepped through. The transition was instantaneous and seamless. One moment, he was breathing the humid, polluted air of Muzidafu. The next, the cool, thin, fragrant air of Kamartaj filled his lungs. The sounds of the city were gone, replaced by a profound, focused silence broken only by the soft scrape of sandals on stone and the low, harmonic hum of ambient energy that seemed to vibrate in his very bones. He had stepped into another world. Izuku stood frozen in the center of the courtyard, turning in a slow circle, his eyes wider than they had ever been. Everything he saw sent his brain into a frenzy of analysis and wonder. The apprentices. Their movements were precise, their control over the golden energy exquisite. He saw one young woman meditating while levitating 3 feet off the ground, a collection of small stones orbiting her placidly. He saw 2 men sparring, not with fists, but with shields and whips made of pure, crackling light. Is that an energy manipulation quirk? He muttered, his old habits dying hard. No, the signature is completely different. It's not originating from their bodies, it's being drawn from somewhere else. And their genetics are irrelevant. I see people of all ages and ethnicities. So it's a learned skill? A technology? No, the incantations suggest a verbal component, and the somatic gestures are too specific, like a form of sign language to command an external force. The architecture itself, it incorporates non-Euclidean geometry. Is it possible the building acts as a focusing lens or an amplifier for whatever ambient energy they're tapping into? The potential applications for rescue and defense are astronomical. A shield that can deflect kinetic force and energy attacks would be invaluable in hostage situations. And the portal. You analyze everything. Wong's voice cut through his muttering storm. Izuku jumped, his face flushing crimson. I'm sorry. It's a habit. I know it's weird, It is not weird, Wong interrupted, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He had seen hundreds of apprentices pass through these halls, many of them gifted, powerful, or arrogant. He had never encountered one who, upon first witnessing the mysteries of the universe, immediately began to deconstruct them like a mechanical schematic. It is a sign of an inquisitive mind. Here, that is an asset, not a liability. But your analysis is based on a flawed premise. You must unlearn what you have learned. Wong led him away from the bustling courtyard, through a series of open-air corridors lined with weathered wooden columns. The hum of magic grew stronger here, and Izuku could feel a strange tingling on his skin, like static electricity. They stopped on a stone balcony that overlooked the main training grounds on one side and a breathtaking vista of snow-capped mountains on the other. Forget everything you know about quirks, Wong began, his voice taking on the tone of a lecturer. A quirk is a biological anomaly. An internal power, locked within your DNA. It is a part of you, like the color of your eyes or the shape of your hands. What we do here is something else entirely. He raised a hand, and a small, intricate globe of golden light bloomed in his palm, continents of energy swirling within it. The universe is not empty. It is one of countless dimensions, each layered atop the others, each teeming with energy. We, the masters of the mystic arts, are not born with power. We learn to draw it from these other dimensions. We harness it, shape it, and use it to bend reality to our will. Magic is not a gift. It is a debt. We borrow power from the multiverse to protect our own reality from threats that your pro-heroes cannot even comprehend. Izuku stared, mesmerized by the miniature world spinning in Wong's hand. So, anyone can learn? He whispered, the question filled with a lifetime of yearning. Anyone with the aptitude, Wong corrected, closing his hand and extinguishing the light. And the aptitude is not strength of body or a high intellect, though those things help. It is discipline. It is tireless study. And above all, it is an indomitable will. A spirit strong enough to impose its shape upon the raw energy of creation. Wong turned to face him fully, his gaze intense. I did not bring you here because I thought you were strong, Izuku Midoriya. Your body is frail, and your spirit is wounded. I brought you here because when you stood in that alley, with no power and no hope, you faced a threat you could not possibly defeat to protect people you did not know. I brought you here for your strength of will. That is the foundation upon which all sorcery is built." The words struck Izuku with more force than any physical blow. All his life, his will, his desperate drive to be a hero, had been treated as a foolish, dangerous delusion. Here, in this impossible place, it was being called the single most important qualification. A tear escaped his eye and traced a path down his cheek, but he barely noticed. "Now," Wong said, his tone shifting back to business, "your education begins. Not in the training yard, but in the library." If Izuku thought the courtyard was overwhelming, it was nothing compared to the library of Kamartage. It wasn't a room, it was a sanctuary. It was a multi-leveled, circular chamber of impossible scale. Shelves stretched up into a domed ceiling painted with a slowly shifting star chart of alien constellations. There was no dust. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the intoxicating scent of ancient parchment and bound leather. Books of every conceivable size and shape lined the shelves. Some were massive, iron-bound tomes chained to their pedestals. Others were delicate scrolls that seemed to hum with a faint inner light. Izuku saw books with titles written in languages that twisted his eyes, scripts that looked more like strings of equations than words. His fanboy heart, so recently broken, reignited with the force of a supernova. "Whoa," he breathed, his voice a reverent whisper. He took a tentative step forward, his eyes darting everywhere. He saw a title in a script he could barely decipher, the Codex of Cagliostro. Another, held under a shimmering shield of energy, was titled on the transdimensional nature of the dark force. His muttering returned, now hushed with awe. "This is the single greatest collection of information in human history. A single page here could probably rewrite every law of physics we know. The preservation methods alone are a marvel. Are these books enchanted? Some of them feel aware. This library contains knowledge gathered over millennia from across the multiverse," Wong explained, walking past a set of levitating orbs that displayed complex, rotating spell matrices. "It also contains some of the most dangerous knowledge in existence. Many of these books are not safe for the uninitiated. To read from them without the proper training would shatter your mind." He led Izuku past the more intimidating sections to a quieter, more brightly lit alcove. The books here looked less like forbidden grimoires and more like well-worn textbooks. "All apprentices begin here," Wong said. He scanned the shelves before pulling out a single, modest volume. It was bound in plain, dark brown leather, the cover unmarked save for a simple geometric symbol embossed in the center. It was heavy in a way that suggested density, not just size. "This will be your first text." Izuku took the book with the reverence of a priest accepting a holy text. He opened it. The pages were thick, like vellum, and the text was written in a neat, clear hand. The title page read, "The Book of the Invisible Sun, a primer on basic energy manipulation." The first few pages contained no grand incantations or world-breaking spells. They were diagrams of the human body, showing energy pathways. There were chapters on focus, on breathing techniques, on the philosophy of channeling versus commanding. It was a workbook. A manual. And to Izuku, it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Your task is simple," Wong said. "Read the first 3 chapters. Meditate on their meaning. Then, you will attempt the first exercise. Do not proceed past that until you have mastered it." And with that, Wong left him. Izuku found a quiet corner, sat cross-legged on a woven mat, and began to read. The world outside the library ceased to exist. He devoured the text, his analytical mind finding a perfect new puzzle to solve. He didn't just read the words, he cross-referenced them, made mental notes, and deconstructed the theories. The concept of drawing energy, of being a conduit, was alien, but the book explained it with a clarity that resonated with him. Hours passed. The light in the library shifted as the alien sun outside arced across the sky. Finally, he finished the 3rd chapter. He closed the book, his mind buzzing. It was time. He moved to a small, empty chamber off the main library, a room designed for basic practice. It was bare, save for meditation cushions on the floor. He sat, mimicking the posture he'd seen in the book, and placed his hands on his knees, palms up. The exercise was simple in theory: quiet the mind, feel the energy of the universe, and draw a minuscule amount into your body, letting it gather in your palms until it manifested as a small spark of light. Izuku closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Quiet the mind. That was the first hurdle. His mind was never quiet. It was a roaring highway of thoughts, anxieties, and analyses. What if I can't do this? What if Wong was wrong about me? Am I breathing correctly? The book said to visualize a river of energy, but what color is it? Is it like electricity? Does it have a temperature? He tried for what felt like an eternity. His hands trembled with effort. He gritted his teeth, squeezing his eyes shut so hard he saw spots. He was trying to force it, to command the energy to appear through sheer desperation. Nothing happened. His palms remained empty and cool. Frustration, a bitter and familiar taste, began to creep in. This was it. This was the moment he discovered he was a failure here, too. That even in a world of magic, he was still just a quirkless, useless Deku. You are trying to shout in a library. Izuku's eyes snapped open. Wong was standing in the doorway, his arms crossed, his expression stern. This is not a battle of strength, Wong said, his voice low and calm. You cannot bully the universe into obeying you. You are trying to force open a door that is already unlocked. Stop trying to kick it down and simply turn the handle. Izuku looked down at his trembling hands. I don't know how. Wong walked over and sat opposite him, his posture perfect, his presence calming. Your mind races. You analyze, you question, you predict. This is your strength. But for this, it is your weakness. Stop thinking about the shape of the spark. Stop worrying about the flow of the river. Just listen for the water. Wong closed his eyes. Breathe with me, boy. In and out. Feel the air fill your lungs. Feel the stone beneath you. You are a part of this place. The energy of this place is a part of you. It is already here. You do not need to summon it. You only need to welcome it. Izuku closed his eyes again, trying to follow Wong's lead. He focused on his breathing, on the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest. He let go of the frustration, of the desperate need to succeed. He stopped trying to analyze. He just listened. For a long time, there was only silence and the sound of his own heartbeat. But then, slowly, he began to feel it. It wasn't a sound, but a sensation, a faint background hum, like the hum of the library but deeper, more fundamental. It was the background radiation of existence itself. The river. He didn't try to dam it or divert it. He just let it flow. He visualized the energy, not as a raging torrent, but as a gentle stream, and imagined it being guided by his will, flowing up through his body, down his arms, and pooling in his hands. He felt a warmth spread through his chest, a pleasant tingling that traveled down to his fingertips. It felt natural. Right. He kept his eyes closed, afraid that opening them would break the fragile connection. The warmth in his palms intensified, becoming a gentle, pleasant heat. Open your eyes, Izuku. He did, and there, hovering a centimeter above his right palm, was a spark. It was tiny. It was no bigger than a firefly, a single, flickering mote of brilliant golden light. It danced and wavered, threatening to go out at any moment. It was fragile. It was pathetic compared to the grand constructs Wong and the other apprentices could create. But it was there. It was his. He hadn't been born with it. He hadn't been given it. He had made it. With his will, with his focus, with the strength of his own spirit. It was the first power he had ever truly possessed. A laugh escaped his lips, a breathless, shaky sound. He looked up at Wong, his eyes shining with unshed tears. The despair that had clung to him like a shroud since the rooftop encounter with All Might finally, truly, began to dissolve, burned away by this one, tiny spark. He stared down at the fading light in his hand, a genuine, hopeful smile gracing his face for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. It was a smile that didn't just touch his lips, it reached his eyes, crinkling their corners. It was a tired, exhausted, but utterly triumphant smile. He had power. He could learn. He could still be a hero. The passage of time in Kamartaj was a fluid, strange thing. There was no jarring ring of a school bell, no rigid schedule dictated by the hours of a 9-to-5 world. The sun rose and set over the colossal, silent peaks of the Himalayas, painting the stone courtyards in hues of gold and violet, and the rhythm of life was dictated by discipline, study, and the slow, steady accumulation of knowledge. For Izuku Midoriya, weeks bled into months in a blur of exhausting physical training, mind-bending lectures on dimensional theory, and long, quiet hours spent with the steady, patient weight of a book in his lap. He had learned to quiet his mind enough to draw forth the golden light of sorcery with some consistency. He could form a wavering eldritch whip, a shield that could deflect a tossed stone, and simple constructs of light, cubes, spheres, and other basic shapes. He was progressing, but he was far from a prodigy. In a place filled with individuals who had spent years honing their focus through meditation and discipline, his frantic, racing mind was a constant handicap. His body, too, was a source of endless frustration. The martial arts training, a cornerstone of a sorcerer's education, was a daily humiliation. While other apprentices moved with a deadly, flowing grace, Izuku was a collection of sharp, clumsy angles. He was perpetually off balance, his movements telegraphed, his mind 5 steps ahead of his uncooperative limbs. "Your problem, Midoriya," said Master Hammer, a wizened old teacher with a long, white beard and a deceptively gentle smile, after effortlessly sweeping Izuku's legs out from under him for the 5th time that morning, "is that you are trying to solve a math problem in the middle of a sword fight. You think, if my opponent moves his left foot forward at this velocity, I should counter with a block at a 45-degree angle. By the time you have finished the equation, you are on your back. You must learn to feel, to react." Izuku, groaning on the cold stone floor, could only nod, his cheeks burning with shame. He understood the theory perfectly. He just couldn't make his body comply. But where his body failed, his mind found its own arena. And in that arena, he was becoming a titan. It started about a month into his training. The familiar, compulsive itch in his fingers became too much to bear. He sought out the quartermaster and, after a confusing conversation in which he tried to explain the concept of a modern spiral-bound notebook, was given a beautiful, hand-stitched leather journal with thick, creamy pages and a pot of ink. That night, under the light of a softly glowing crystal, he opened it to the first page. With the reverence of a scribe beginning a holy text, he dipped his quill and wrote the title, "Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 14, Mystic Arts Edition." A dam broke. The obsessive, analytical nature that had made him an outcast in his old world found a subject worthy of its intensity. Magic was an infinitely complex, endlessly fascinating system, and he dove into it head first. He didn't just copy spells from the tomes Wong assigned him. He vivisected them. His first entry was on the first spell he had truly managed to cast. Spell, Eldritch Spark, Initiate Level, Source, The Book of the Invisible Sun, CH3. Components, Verbal, none required. The incantation is a training wheel for focus. The true verbal component is the intent held in the mind. The desire for light or warmth, somatic, hand gestures open palm, fingers slightly curled. Posture must be relaxed but focused. Tension in the shoulders or back seems to disrupt the energy flow. Is the physical body acting as a grounding circuit? Mental, the most critical component, requires a calm focus. This is difficult. My own mind tends to scatter. Analogy: it's like trying to tune a radio to a single, faint station while a dozen other stations are blasting static. The river of energy described by Wong Sensei is real, but it's chaotic. The sorcerers will act as the canal, giving it direction and form. Energy signature: feels warm, slightly electric. Dissipates quickly. Power output is negligible, less than a standard LED flashlight. Observed applications: 1. Signaling. 2. Basic illumination. 3. Igniting flammable materials untested, but probable. Potential for improvement/further analysis. Can the duration of the spark be extended by creating a continuous, stable energy loop? Could the intensity, lumens, be increased by drawing on a larger current from the dimensional source? This seems to risk losing control. Could the color of the light be changed by altering the practitioner's emotional state or intent? E.g., calm focus produces gold, what would angry focus produce? Note: do not test this without supervision. Wong Sensei's warnings about emotional casting were very specific. His notebook filled with alarming speed. He drew detailed diagrams of the somatic gestures for a dozen different basic spells, with notes on finger pressure and wrist rotation. He created charts cross-referencing runic symbols from different texts, hypothesizing a kind of proto-language of creation. He treated the mystic arts not as a series of divine commandments to be memorized, but as a form of cosmic physics to be understood, catalogued, and ultimately optimized. This unique approach set him apart. During a lecture on rudimentary warding schemes, the instructor, a stern woman named Master Adria, drew a complex series of interlocking runes on a slate. This is the standard array of abjuration, she explained. It creates a perimeter that repels minor spectral entities. Memorize its form. The geometry is sacred. While the other students dutifully copied the pattern, Izuku was frowning, his brow furrowed in concentration. He raised a tentative hand. Adria sighed. Yes, Midoriya? Master Adria, he began, his voice barely above a mutter. I was just looking at the flow of the array. The primary rune, Kenna's, channels the repulsive force, but it's being drawn through the Ansa's rune, which is typically for insight or communication. It creates a sort of energetic bottleneck. Wouldn't it be more efficient to channel the force directly through the Thurisaz rune? Its symbolic meaning is more aligned with directed force, and the geometric linkage would be more direct, potentially increasing the ward's repulsive strength by, I don't know, maybe 15 or 20%. The classroom went dead silent. The other apprentices stared at him, their expressions a mixture of confusion and awe. They saw runes as holy symbols to be copied. Izuku saw them as lines of code, and he was suggesting a way to debug it. Master Adria stared at him, her mouth slightly agape. She looked back at the board, tracing the path he had suggested with her finger. Her eyebrows shot up. That is an astute observation, Midoriya, she said slowly, a new note of respect in her voice. The traditional array is designed for stability above all else. Your suggestion, while theoretically more powerful, might be less stable. But the logic is sound. Very sound. From that day on, he gained a reputation. He was still the clumsy, physically inept apprentice in the training yard, but in the library and the lecture halls, he was the analyst. Apprentices began to quietly seek him out for help understanding complex theories, and even some of the senior masters started to regard him with a curious, thoughtful gaze. He was beginning to build a confidence based not on what his body could do, but on what his mind could achieve. Wong was not an inattentive teacher. As the Sorcerer Supreme and the Master of Camartage, it was his duty to oversee the development of all his students. He observed Izuku's daily struggles in the yard with a critical eye, noting the boy's lack of physical intuition. But he also observed his voracious appetite for knowledge in the library, the way the boy seemed to absorb information not just by reading it, but by wrestling with it, dissecting it, making it his own. One evening, long after the evening meal and the final meditation, Wong was making his rounds through the silent library. It was his sanctuary, a place of profound order and quiet. He found something out of place, a single leather-bound journal left on a reading desk in a secluded alcove. He recognized the simple, sturdy binding as the one the quartermaster had provided for the Midoriya boy. His first instinct was to simply set it aside for the boy to retrieve in the morning. But curiosity, a trait he rarely indulged, got the better of him. He knew the boy was taking copious notes. He wanted to see the quality of his mind on the page. He picked up the journal. Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 14, Mystic Arts Edition. Wong raised a skeptical eyebrow at the peculiar title. He opened it to a random page. His eyes widened. He was looking at a 2-page spread dedicated to the Crimson Bands of Sidorak. Not the full, legendary incantation. That was locked away in a far more dangerous section of the library. This was the basic binding spell derived from its principles. But the page was not just a transcription. On the left was a drawing of the spell in action, a series of glowing red bands wrapping around a training dummy. Arrows pointed to different parts of the construct, with labels like primary anchor point, tensile strength vector, and energy decay rate. On the right was a block of text, written in Izuku's dense, slightly frantic script. Spell, rudimentary binding cords, derived from Sidorak. Analysis, a powerful immobilization tool. Draws on extra-dimensional energy to create semi-sentient bands of force that seek and restrain a target. Strengths: adaptive. The bands actively tighten and reform in response to a target's struggles. Far superior to a simple energy cage. Durable, highly resistant to physical force. Efficient, requires a relatively small initial energy investment for a significant effect. Weaknesses: vulnerable anchor. The spell is mentally anchored to a point in space by the caster. If the caster's concentration is broken, the bands dissolve instantly. This makes it unreliable in a chaotic combat situation. Single target focus, difficult to maintain on more than one opponent, susceptible to magical disruption. A simple severing spell can cut the bands. Proposed modification synergies. Ultimate moves. 1. Capture web. By weaving multiple, smaller sets of bands together during the initial casting, could a net-like effect be created to capture multiple, closely grouped targets? Would require immense concentration. 2. Ricochet bind. Instead of a direct cast, could the bands be bounced off a solid surface, like a wall or a shield construct, to attack a target from an unexpected angle? High skill shot potential. 3. Anchor transfer. Is it possible to transfer the spell's mental anchor to a physical object? For example, cast the bands and then anchor them to the floor, freeing the caster's concentration for other tasks. This would be a game-changer for hero rescue operations, allowing a sorcerer to restrain a villain while simultaneously shielding civilians. Wong slowly closed the journal, his mind reeling. He had seen millennia of magical study. He had read the notes of the most brilliant sorcerers in history. And he had never seen anything like this. The boy wasn't just learning spells. He was treating them like quirks. He was analyzing them with the detached, practical eye of a pro hero studying an opponent. He was cataloging their strengths, probing their weaknesses, and theorizing ultimate moves. It was an approach so alien to the sacred, traditional study of the mystic arts that it bordered on heresy. And yet, it was utterly, undeniably brilliant. The anchor transfer idea alone was revolutionary. It was a concept that senior masters had debated in theoretical terms for decades, but had never codified into a practical technique because their thinking was too rigid, too bound by tradition. This boy, this quirkless child from another world, had independently conceived of it in a matter of months simply by applying a different analytical framework. Wong stood in the silent library, the boy's journal heavy in his hand, and felt a profound sense of vindication. He had not brought a student to Camartage. He had brought a paradigm shift. The culmination of Izuku's unique approach came during a practical application test. The apprentices were gathered in one of the larger training halls. In the center of the room was a large, crystalline orb known as a focus conduit. Its purpose was to generate a steady, sustained beam of raw magical energy. The test was simple: stand before the beam and maintain a standard eldritch shield for as long as possible. It was a test of pure willpower and focus. One by one, the apprentices stepped up. The beam, a pulsating stream of white gold energy, lashed out and struck their hastily formed shields. Most could hold for 10 or 15 seconds before their shields flickered and shattered, forcing them to leap aside. Ilara, the graceful apprentice who always bested Izuku in sparring, held hers for an impressive 32 seconds, her jaw set in determination, sweat beading on her forehead. Then it was Izuku's turn. He took a deep breath, his heart hammering. This was his worst area. Raw power, sustained focus under pressure. He was already dreading the familiar feeling of his concentration fracturing. He stepped into position and raised his hands, tracing the familiar circular pattern in the air. Okay, Midoriya, just focus, Master Hammer said encouragingly. Breathe. Be the stone. The beam erupted from the conduit and slammed into his shield. The impact was jarring, a physical and mental shockwave. His shield, a translucent golden disc, buckled immediately. It flickered like a faulty fluorescent light, cracks spiderwebbing across its surface. He poured all his concentration into it, gritting his teeth, but it was like trying to patch a bursting dam with his bare hands. The energy from the conduit was too direct, too focused. His shield wasn't blocking it, it was just barely enduring it. 5 seconds. His arms trembled. His concentration was slipping. He could feel the raw power of the beam pressing against his will. 6 seconds. A large crack appeared, and the beam punched through, searing the air an inch from his shoulder. He yelped and reinforced the spot, but another area began to fail. 7 seconds. It was no good. His focus wasn't strong enough. His will wasn't absolute enough. He was going to fail, just like he always did when it came to practical application. Be realistic. All Might's voice, a ghost at the feast. No. A new thought cut through the panic, sharp and clear. It wasn't All Might's voice. It wasn't Wong's. It was his own, the voice of the analyst. The problem isn't the will. It's the design. He thought of his notebook, of the page he had spent an entire night working on just last week. Spell, basic Eldritch Shield, Camartage standard form. Weaknesses, centralized stress point. The standard somatic gesture creates a flat disk. All incoming force is directed to the center of the energy matrix. This creates a single point of failure. Inefficient energy distribution. The caster must constantly push energy from their will into the shield to counteract the incoming force. It's a direct contest of power. Proposed modification, geodesic reinforcement. Theory: instead of a flat disk, what if the energy were woven into an interlocking, multifaceted pattern, like a honeycomb or a geodesic dome? This would distribute the kinetic/magical energy of an impact across the entire surface of the shield, rather than concentrating it at a single point. It would be structurally superior. New somatic component required. The standard circular motion is insufficient. It would require a more complex, interwoven gesture to create the interlocking matrix. Right there, in the middle of the test, with a high-energy beam threatening to blast him across the room, Izuku made a decision. He wasn't going to try harder. He was going to try smarter. He let his failing shield dissolve. The apprentices gasped. Master Hammer shouted mid-area, "Get out of there!" But Izuku didn't move. In the split second before the beam hit him, he brought his hands up in a new formation. It wasn't the smooth, open-handed circle of the standard shield. His fingers were interlaced, his thumbs pressed together, his hands forming a complex shape like a cat's cradle. He pushed forward, pouring his will not into a flat wall, but into the intricate pattern he had designed in his mind. A new shield sprang into existence. It was different. It wasn't a simple, glowing disk. It was a shallow, curved dome, and its surface was a shimmering, interlocking lacework of golden hexagons. It looked less like a magical shield and more like a piece of hyper-advanced technology. It looked solid, crystalline, engineered. The beam struck it a fraction of a second later. There was no violent impact, no jarring shudder. When the energy hit the hexagonal shield, it didn't press, it flowed. The golden light of the beam dispersed across the intricate patterns, spreading the force evenly over the entire surface. The shield glowed brighter, humming with a low, resonant frequency, but it did not buckle. It did not crack. It held. Izuku's eyes were wide with shock and elation. It worked. It worked. He could feel the difference. He wasn't fighting a brute force battle against the beam anymore. His shield was doing the work for him, redirecting the energy with breathtaking efficiency. 10 seconds passed. Then 20. Then 30. At 33 seconds, he officially surpassed Alara, who was staring, utterly dumbfounded. The other apprentices were whispering, pointing. Master Hammer's jaw was on the floor. Wong, who had been observing from a shadowed alcove, stepped forward, his expression unreadable. He gave a sharp nod to the master controlling the conduit. Increase the output. The master hesitated, then complied. The beam intensified, the hum rising to a piercing whine. The light grew almost too bright to look at. The force pressing against Izuku's shield doubled. He grunted, his feet sliding back an inch on the stone. But the shield held. The hexagonal patterns glowed with furious intensity, the geometric structure flawlessly distributing the incredible strain. 40 seconds. 50. A full minute. Izuku was panting, sweat pouring down his face, but a fierce, triumphant grin was plastered across his face. He had done it. He had taken a fundamental piece of magic, something that had been taught the same way for centuries, and he had made it better. He had won, not with power, but with his brain. Enough, Wong's voice boomed, cutting through the silence. The beam cut off. Izuku's new shield dissolved, and he staggered, falling to one knee, exhausted but buzzing with adrenaline. The training hall was silent for a moment, and then it erupted in a wave of murmurs and astonished whispers. Izuku looked up, his chest heaving, a wide, proud smile on his face, ready for the praise he felt he had, for the first time, truly earned. But Wong was not smiling. His face was a mask of unreadable gravity. He strode across the floor, his heavy robes sweeping behind him, and stopped directly in front of the kneeling boy. The other students and masters fell silent, sensing the immense authority radiating from him. In his hand, Wong was holding a familiar, ink-stained leather journal. He held it up for Izuku to see. "Midoriya," he said, his voice low and sharp, devoid of any warmth. It was the voice of the Sorcerer Supreme, the guardian of reality, and it tolerated no argument. "My study. Now." He turned on his heel. "Bring your notebook. You will explain your methodology." The walk to Wong's study was the longest, most terrifying journey of Izuku's life. It surpassed the fear of the sludge villain, the rooftop fall with all might, even the moment he stepped through his first portal. This was a different kind of terror, the cold, sinking dread of a student being summoned to the principal's office, amplified by the fact that this principal could banish him to the dimension of infinite screaming toads if he so chose. Each step echoed in the hallowed, silent corridors of Kamartage. Izuku clutched his notebook to his chest like a shield, the leather cover now feeling slick with the sweat from his palms. What had he done wrong? He'd improved the shield spell. He'd surpassed everyone. He had taken a piece of magic and, through pure analysis, made it objectively better. Wasn't that a good thing? Wasn't innovation valued here? Or was it blasphemy? Had he, in his analytical arrogance, tampered with forces he didn't understand? Was the standard shield spell designed that way for a reason, a hidden safety protocol he'd bypassed in his quest for efficiency? His mind, his greatest asset, was now his worst enemy, generating 1,000 catastrophic scenarios. He imagined his hexagonal shield having some unforeseen side effect, like slowly unraveling the caster's soul or attracting cosmic horrors that fed on well-structured mana. Wong's study was as severe and disciplined as the man himself. It was a large, circular room, dominated by a massive, dark wood desk that was immaculately tidy. The walls weren't lined with books, but with glass-fronted cabinets. Within them, resting on velvet cushions, were not books, but objects. A golden, ornate gauntlet. A strange, multi-lensed eyepiece. A small, intricately carved wooden box that seemed to absorb the light around it. And on a pedestal in the center of the room, a magnificent amulet in the shape of a stylized eye, held within a golden lattice, the Eye of Agamotto. The Sorcerer Supreme's greatest weapon and a relic of unimaginable power. The air in the room was thick with it, a palpable pressure of contained magic that made the hair on Izuku's arms stand on end. Wong was standing by the large, circular window that looked out onto the majestic, snow-dusted peaks of the Himalayas. He didn't turn as Izuku entered. "Place the notebook on the desk," Wong commanded, his voice calm but allowing no room for disobedience. Izuku scurried forward and gently placed his precious journal on the polished surface of the desk. It looked small and insignificant in the vast, intimidating room. He then stood ramrod straight, his hands clasped tightly behind his back, waiting for his sentence. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the wind whistling past the window. Then Wong turned. His expression was still stern, unreadable, but the fiery anger Izuku had feared was not there. In its place was an intense, piercing curiosity. "Explain," Wong said, gesturing to the notebook. "Start from the beginning. Explain why you write in this." Izuku swallowed, his throat dry. I've always done it, sir. Wong-sensei. Back home, I used to analyze pro-hero quirks. Their strengths, weaknesses, applications. It was just a hobby, a way for me to feel a part of a world I couldn't join. When I came here, I just continued. Magic, sorcery, it's the most complex, most powerful quirk I've ever seen. I wanted to understand it, not just how to use it, but how it works. He began to speak faster, the words tumbling out in his characteristic mutterstorm, his passion overriding his fear. I wasn't trying to be disrespectful to the traditional forms, I swear. It's just that, when I see a spell, I see a system. It has rules, inputs, outputs. The somatic gestures, the runic structures, they're like a user interface for the universe's operating system, and like any system, it can be analyzed. I started noticing patterns, inefficiencies, potential synergies. The standard shield is strong, but its design is basic. It opposes force with force. My design, the geodesic reinforcement, I called it, it doesn't oppose the force, it distributes it. It's a more efficient use of the caster's will. I theorized it would be, but I didn't know it would work until the test. He trailed off, breathless, realizing he'd been rambling. He looked at Wong, bracing himself for the reprimand. Wong was silent for a full minute, his gaze fixed on Izuku. He walked over to the desk, picked up the journal, and opened it again. He flipped through the pages slowly, his eyes scanning the dense blocks of text, the intricate diagrams, the frankly ridiculous ultimate move titles. Finally, he closed the book and placed it back on the desk. He looked at Izuku, and for the first time, the stern mask of the Sorcerer Supreme cracked. A slow, profound smile spread across Wong's face. It was a rare, genuine expression of deep and utter astonishment. In 1,000 years, Wong said, his voice filled with a quiet awe that sent a shockwave through Izuku, no one in Kamartage has ever thought to do this. We are tradition-bound. We are taught to revere the ancient ways, to trust in the wisdom of our predecessors. We see magic as a sacred art. You see it as a science. And you have proven, beyond any doubt, that your approach has merit. Izuku stared, his brain struggling to process the words. Praise. He was being praised. Your geodesic reinforcement shield, Wong continued, is a work of intuitive genius. You have single-handedly created a new fundamental technique that will be taught to apprentices for centuries to come. You have done so not through superior power or divine insight, but through meticulous observation and analysis. You should be proud. The relief that washed over Izuku was so potent it made him dizzy. He felt his knees weaken, and he gripped the edge of the desk for support. So, I'm not in trouble? Wong's smile faded slightly, replaced by a more serious expression. You are not in trouble for your innovation. But you are in trouble for your recklessness. You tested a highly modified, experimental spell for the first time under direct, high-energy stress. Had your calculations been flawed, had your theory contained a single mistake, your shield would have collapsed catastrophically. The feedback could have shattered your connection to the mystic arts permanently, or worse. Izuku paled, the thought chilling him to the bone. I didn't think of that. Of course you didn't, Wong said, his voice softening slightly. Your instinct is that of a hero, to act, to solve the problem in front of you. My instinct is that of a guardian, to consider every consequence, every possible ripple. Both are necessary. Which brings me to the next stage of your education. Wong gestured to the cabinets lining the walls. Some magic is too vast, too potent, or too specific to be wielded directly by a sorcerer. The human mind and body are powerful conduits, but they have their limits. For tasks that exceed those limits, we use these. He walked over to one of the cabinets, and opened it. Relics. Objects imbued with immense mystical power, or crafted to channel it in a specific way. They are not toys, Midoriya. They are tools, and more than that, they are responsibilities. He reached inside and took out a simple-looking object, a pair of dark, steel-gray bracers. They were unadorned, save for fine, silvery lines of runes etched into the metal. They hummed with a quiet, contained energy. These are the bracers of binding, Wong explained, holding them out to Izuku. They are a training relic. They do not grant you any new power. Instead, they help to stabilize and channel the energy you are already drawing. They act as a regulator, smoothing out the fluctuations in your focus, making your constructs more solid, more durable. For a mind as active as yours, they will be invaluable. Izuku took them with trembling hands. The metal was cool to the touch, but a gentle warmth emanated from the runes, pulsing in time with his own heartbeat. He slid them onto his forearms. They resized instantly, fitting him as if they had been forged for him alone. He could feel the difference immediately. The ambient hum of magic in the room seemed to clarify, to resolve from a chaotic buzz into a clear, steady tone in his mind. A relic does not make the sorcerer, Wong said sternly, his eyes locking with Izuku's. The sorcerer gives the relic purpose. Rely on it as a crutch, and your own skills will atrophy. Use it as a tool to augment your strengths and shore up your weaknesses, and you will grow stronger. Do you understand the difference? Yes, Wong-sensei, Izuku said, his voice filled with a new sense of gravity. This was his first piece of gear. His first support item. It felt momentous. Good, Wong said. Now, for your next lesson. Responsibility. The next few days were a revelation for Izuku. With the bracers of binding, his practical magic improved by leaps and bounds. The energy he channeled was smoother, more controlled. His eldritch whips no longer flickered in and out of existence. His simple constructs were solid and stable. Even his new geodesic shield was easier to maintain, the bracers helping to regulate the complex energy flow required to form the hexagonal matrix. He spent hours in the training yards, a new confidence flowing through him. He was still clumsy in hand-to-hand combat, but now he could weave his burgeoning magical skills into the sparring sessions. He learned to form a small, solid shield on his forearm to block a blow, or to manifest a short, glowing staff to parry an attack. He was beginning to synthesize, to blend his analytical mind with his practical application. But his education was not confined to the training yards. Wong now took him on weekly rounds through the more secure areas of Camartage, the places where the true responsibilities of a sorcerer were made clear. He was shown the vaults. They were not grand, treasure-filled rooms, but stark, functional chambers, lined with shelves and pedestals. Each held a single object, contained within a shimmering field of magical energy. Izuku saw a crown that whispered in a language of madness, a mirror that showed not reflections but terrifying possibilities, and a simple wooden music box that, when Wong briefly lowered the containment field, filled the air with a melody so sorrowful it brought tears to Izuku's eyes. These are not weapons to be wielded, Wong explained, his voice low and serious as they walked through the silent vault. They are plagues to be contained, cursed objects, unstable artifacts, conduits to hostile dimensions. Our duty is not to use them, but to keep them safe from the world, and the world safe from them. Izuku looked at the array of dangerous objects, his mind cataloging them, analyzing the containment spells used to hold them. He saw the grim reality behind the beautiful golden light of sorcery. Being a master of the mystic arts wasn't just about power, it was about stewardship. It was about being the silent, unseen janitor of the universe, cleaning up the messes that others left behind, locking away the things that were too dangerous to exist. It was a hero's work, but it was thankless, secret, and never-ending. The lesson was driven home in a sudden, unexpected way. It happened during a quiet afternoon. Izuku was in the library, using the bracers to practice forming more complex rune sequences in the air, when a series of discordant chimes echoed through Camartage. It was an alarm. Not a loud, blaring siren, but a series of urgent, magical tones that vibrated in the stone itself. Senior sorcerers began to move with a calm, practiced urgency, their expressions hardening. Izuku saw Alara, the talented sparring apprentice, run past with a determined look, her hands already glowing with eldritch energy. Wong appeared at the library entrance, his face a grim mask. Containment breach. Minor entity. Section Gamma 7. He looked at Izuku. Stay here. Observe. Do not interfere. But Izuku's feet were already moving, following Wong at a safe distance. He couldn't just stay put. He had to see, to analyze. They arrived at a section of the monastery that served as a sort of low-level holding area. Several senior apprentices were already there, casting spells at nothing, or rather, at the chaos. Books were flying from shelves. Furniture was being overturned. A suit of ornamental armor was doing a clumsy jig in the corner. The air was filled with a high-pitched, childish giggling. It's a poltergeist, one of the apprentices shouted, frustration clear in her voice. A minor chaos spirit. I can't get a lock on it. My binding spells pass right through it. She cast a set of crimson bands, but they simply flew through the air where the giggling was loudest and slapped against the far wall, dissolving uselessly. Another sorcerer tried to form an energy cage, but the invisible entity simply seemed to phase through the bars, knocking over a vase on its way out. The spirit wasn't malevolent, just mischievous and immensely destructive. It was a child throwing a tantrum with the laws of physics. The sorcerers were using tools designed for combat, for direct confrontation, but their target was ethereal, non-corporeal. They were trying to punch smoke. Izuku watched from the doorway, his analytical mind kicking into overdrive, the bracers of binding humming softly on his arms. Problem: target is non-corporeal and highly mobile. Standard immobilization spells are ineffective as they are designed to affect physical or magical bodies. Direct attacks are useless. He frantically scanned the room, his eyes darting everywhere. He wasn't looking for a weapon. He was looking for a solution. His mind raced through the countless pages he had read in the library. Spectral entities, dimensional resonance, sympathetic frequencies. An image flashed in his mind. It was from a dusty, forgotten tome he'd read just a few nights ago, an introduction to metaphysical harmonics. It was a deeply theoretical book, one most apprentices ignored as useless. It spoke of how all beings, even non-corporeal ones, vibrated at a specific dimensional frequency. It theorized that matching that frequency could be used to communicate with, pacify, or even disrupt such entities. The book had mentioned a specific tool. His eyes landed on a display case on the far wall. It was filled with old, archaic-looking musical instruments, artifacts from a bygone era of sorcery. Among them was a set of what looked like long, silver tuning forks, each etched with delicate runes. The Kavalan tuning forks. According to the book, they were designed not to create music, but to create pure, resonant frequencies. The senior sorcerers were still flinging spells around uselessly. The chaos was escalating. Wong was observing, his expression grim, letting his students handle the situation, but Izuku could see the tension in his shoulders. He was about to step in. Izuku didn't have time to ask for permission. His body moved on its own. He sprinted across the room, dodging a levitating chair. The binding spells aren't working because you're targeting its form, he shouted, his voice cracking with adrenaline. You have to target its frequency. The other apprentices stared at him as if he were insane. He ignored them, skidding to a halt in front of the display case. The glass was magically sealed. He didn't know the password or the release rune. He didn't have time to learn. He held up his hands, the bracers on his arms glowing faintly. He didn't form a fist or an energy blade. He formed a construct of a simple, sharp-pointed lockpick. It was a flimsy, pathetic-looking thing, but he didn't need power. He needed precision. He jammed the eldritch lockpick into the arcane lock and, focusing his will, manipulated the tumblers inside. There was a soft click. The case swung open. He grabbed two of the tuning forks. They were cool to the touch and vibrated with a faint, internal energy. The giggling chaos spirit, sensing a new variable, seemed to pause its rampage. A stack of books hovered menacingly in the air above Izuku's head. Midoriya, what are you doing? Elara yelled. Get out of here. Izuku ignored her. He held up the forks and, focusing his will, struck them against each other. They didn't produce a musical note. They produced a sound that was felt as much as heard, a pure, crystalline wave of sonic energy that washed through the room. It was a clean, perfect A. But the poltergeist's giggling turned into an annoyed hiss. Wrong frequency. He remembered the book. The frequency had to match the entity's emotional state. This one was mischievous, chaotic, juvenile. It was a being of high, frantic energy. He needed a higher frequency. He struck the forks together again, but this time he channeled a tiny sliver of his own will into them, using the principles from the book to raise the pitch of the resonant wave. He pushed it higher, and higher still, past the range of human hearing, guided only by the feeling of the entity's presence. The poltergeist shrieked. The hovering books clattered to the floor. The effect was immediate. The pure, ordered frequency was like nails on a chalkboard to the chaotic spirit. Keep it distracted. Izuku yelled, concentrating fiercely on maintaining the resonant wave. The other sorcerers, stunned but recognizing a change in the tide, rallied. They didn't cast attack spells. They began casting simple light and sound spells, bursts of harmless color, loud noises, creating a sensory overload to further disorient the flustered spirit. Izuku pushed the frequency even higher. The invisible entity let out a final, frustrated wail. For a single, fleeting moment, its form became visible, a small, childlike silhouette made of shimmering, distorted air. That was all Wong needed. With a movement too fast to follow, The Sorcerer Supreme stepped forward. In his hand was a small, empty crystal vessel. He uttered a single, sharp word of power, a word that seemed to bend the air around it, and the shimmering silhouette was pulled from the air, sucked into the crystal like smoke into a bottle. Wong sealed the vessel with a glowing rune, and the room fell silent. The chaos was over. The only sounds were the heavy breathing of the apprentices and the faint, fading hum of the tuning fork in Izuku's hand. Everyone stared at him. Elara looked at him with a new, shocked respect. The other apprentices were wide-eyed. He had not used a single offensive spell. He hadn't overpowered the entity. He had outthought it. He had used knowledge as his weapon. Izuku finally lowered the tuning forks, his arms trembling from the strain of maintaining his focus. He looked up at Wong, his heart pounding, half expecting a reprimand for disobeying a direct order. Wong walked over to him. He looked at the pacified spirit in the crystal, then at the tuning forks in Izuku's hands, and finally at Izuku himself. His expression was serious, but his eyes held a deep, profound approval. He placed a heavy, reassuring hand on Izuku's shoulder. A pro-hero defeats a villain, Wong said, his voice quiet but resonant in the silent room. A sorcerer restores balance. You did not defeat the entity. You understood it, and you used that understanding to solve the problem with minimal force and maximum efficiency. That is the true mark of a master of the mystic arts. He then gestured to the bracers of binding on Izuku's arms. A tool, he said, tapping them lightly. And you, Izuku Midoriya, have proven you know how to use it, not as a crutch, but as an extension of your greatest asset. He tapped Izuku's forehead. Your mind. In that moment, standing in the wreckage of the storeroom, Izuku felt a profound shift within himself. He was not just a student anymore. He was not just a boy playing with magic. He had faced a real mystical threat, and he had been instrumental in stopping it. He had proven his worth, not with the power he wielded, but with the knowledge he had accumulated. He was beginning to understand his role. He wasn't just a hero in training. He was a protector. A guardian. A sorcerer. The weight of responsibility, Izuku was learning, was heavier than any textbook, more exhausting than any physical trial. In the weeks following the poltergeist incident, his status within Kamartage had irrevocably shifted. He was no longer just a clumsy, muttering apprentice with a strange analytical obsession. He was Midoriya, the boy who had outsmarted a chaos spirit, the innovator of the geodesic shield. The other apprentices treated him with a newfound respect, often seeking his input on complex magical theories. Even the senior masters would occasionally pause to listen to his insights during lectures, a subtle but significant acknowledgement of his unique talents. Wong had taken this shift as a sign that Izuku was ready for a deeper level of education. Their sessions together became more frequent, moving beyond the fundamentals of energy manipulation and into the far more esoteric and dangerous arts of divination and scrying. To be a guardian of a realm, Wong had explained, his voice echoing in the observatory at the highest point of Kamartage, is not merely to react to threats as they appear. It is to anticipate them, to see the fault lines in reality before they crack, to perceive the ripples of a coming storm. The tools of scrying are not for spying on your enemies or for predicting the future. The future is not a fixed point. It is a river with 1,000 currents. These tools are for observation, for understanding the present on a scale beyond what your 5 senses can perceive. The primary tool for this was the Orb of Agamotto. It was not the Eye of Agamotto, the legendary relic Wong wore around his neck. This was a larger, stationary version, a magnificent crystal sphere nearly a meter in diameter, resting on a trio of clawed, golden legs. It was housed in the observatory, a circular room with a domed ceiling that magically mirrored the starscape outside, showing not just the familiar constellations of Earth, but the swirling, multicolored nebulae of other dimensions that bled through the veil. The orb itself was usually cloudy, filled with a milky, swirling mist. But under the guidance of a skilled sorcerer, it could become a window to anywhere in the known universe. Izuku's first lessons were terrifying. Wong had him focus on simple, remote viewing tasks within Kamartage itself, observing the kitchens, the training yards, the silent library. It was mentally exhausting work, requiring a level of concentration that left him drained and nursing a splitting headache. The orb did not simply show you a place, it inundated you with it. He could feel the heat from the cooking fires, smell the ink and parchment of the library, hear the grunts and shouts of the sparring apprentices, all at once. It was a sensory deluge that he had to learn to filter, to focus, to control. After several weeks of grueling practice, Wong deemed him ready for a more significant test. "Your control has improved," Wong stated one evening, as they stood before the orb. The magical sky above them was a tapestry of deep indigo and shimmering cosmic dust. "You can now hold the stable image without being overwhelmed by the sensory input. It is time for you to look further afield." Izuku's heart began to beat a little faster. He knew what this meant. "There is a purpose to this, Midoriya," Wong said, sensing the boy's anticipation. "A sorcerer who severs all ties to their home becomes a poor guardian of it. You must remember what it is you are fighting to protect. You have been here for nearly 10 months. It is time for you to see what you have left behind." 10 months. The number hit Izuku with the force of a physical blow. It had felt like both an eternity and the blink of an eye. 10 months of rising before the sun, of calloused hands and an aching back, of a mind stretched to its absolute limit. 10 months without seeing his mother smile, without tasting her katsudon, without the familiar, comforting clutter of his all-might-themed bedroom. A sharp, poignant pang of homesickness, an emotion he had ruthlessly suppressed, pierced through his disciplined focus. "Focus your intent," Wong instructed, his voice pulling Izuku back to the present. "Do not search for a person. That is a far more invasive and difficult art. Search for a place that is the center of your old dreams. Picture it in your mind. Let the orb show you." Izuku took a deep breath, the cool, thin air of the mountains doing little to calm the frantic fluttering in his chest. He closed his eyes and thought of the place that had consumed his every waking thought for years. A place that now felt like a relic from another life. Yue High School. He placed his hands on the cool, smooth surface of the orb, the bracers of binding on his arms humming in sympathy with the artifact's immense power. He poured his will into it, not with force, but with a gentle, guiding touch, as Wong had taught him. He envisioned the iconic, H-shaped building, the towering gates, the sprawling campus. The milky mist within the orb began to churn, to coalesce. An image flickered, distorted, then snapped into sharp, breathtaking focus. He was looking down, as if from a great height, at the UA campus. It was exactly as he had imagined it, as he had seen it in countless news reports and hero forums. The sun was bright, the sky a familiar, hazy blue of a Japanese afternoon. It was so real, he could almost feel the humidity, a stark contrast to the dry, crisp air of the Himalayas. "Good," Wong's voice was a low murmur beside him. "You have a stable connection. Now, refine your focus. You wish to be a hero. Show me the heroes." Izuku narrowed his focus, his will reaching out, pushing the viewpoint closer. The image zoomed in, passing through the walls of the main building as if they were smoke. He saw classrooms, hallways filled with students in crisp uniforms, their faces a mixture of boredom, excitement, and ambition. He saw teachers he recognized from hero magazines, the stoic, tired-looking form of Eraserhead, the flamboyant, loud presence of President Mike. Then, the orb's view shifted, drawn by his subconscious desire, to one of the massive outdoor training facilities. The unforeseen simulation joint, the USJ. And there they were. Class 1A. His class. The class he should have been in. His breath hitched. He saw them all, faces he recognized from his obsessive research, from the news reports of the sludge villain incident that felt like a lifetime ago. There was the serious, blue-haired boy with engines in his calves, Tenya Ida. The cheerful, round-faced girl with pink pads on her fingertips, Ochako Uraraka. A boy with red and white hair, half his body limned with a faint frost. A girl with long, green hair like a vine. They were all there, clad in their brand-new hero costumes, listening intently as the space hero, 13, addressed them. It was a perfect, crystalline moment of what might have been. He could see himself standing there among them. His own costume design, the one with the green jumpsuit and the long-eared mask that mimicked All Might's hairstyle, finally realized. He would be vibrating with an excitement so intense he could barely stand still, his notebook probably already out, furiously scribbling notes on his classmates' quirks and costumes. The scene in the orb shifted again, as if sensing the conflict in his heart, and showed him a different training ground, a different time. The entrance exam. Robots, massive and menacing, rampaged through a cityscape replica, and there was Kaken. Katsuki Bakugo was a whirlwind of explosive fury. He moved with a brutal, predatory grace that Izuku knew better than anyone. Explosions bloomed from his palms, propelling him through the air in a series of controlled, violent arcs. He blasted through the foe villains with contemptuous ease, a savage grin stretched across his face. It was the face of a boy who knew, with absolute, unshakable certainty, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He was a force of nature, a prodigy, a born winner. Izuku watched, a complex cocktail of emotions churning in his gut. There was still a flicker of the old, awestruck admiration he'd always had for his friend's power, but it was now mingled with a strange, clinical detachment. He analyzed Kaken's movements with his new sorcerer's eye. Incredible power output, but highly inefficient. He wastes a tremendous amount of energy on excessive propulsion. His fighting style is entirely offensive, leaving him vulnerable to counterattacks. He relies on overwhelming force, a tactic that would be useless against an intangible or non-corporeal opponent. The thought died in his throat, replaced by a cold, hollowing ache. He was analyzing him. Not as a fellow student, not as a rival, not even as a friend. He was analyzing him as an outsider. He was watching his own dream play out on a screen, and he wasn't in it. The world had, as he had feared on that rooftop, moved on without him. These students, his would-be classmates, were on their path. They were learning, growing, fighting. They were becoming heroes. And what was he? A student of a secret, ancient order, learning to manipulate invisible energies. He was hidden away in a monastery on the roof of the world, practicing an art that no one in his home country even knew existed. He had traded the bright, celebrated path of a pro-hero for a life in the shadows. A deep, profound melancholy settled over him, heavier than any physical weight. It was the ghost of his dead dream, rising up to haunt him. He had convinced himself that this new path was just as valid, just as heroic. But seeing it all laid out before him, the costumes, the training, the camaraderie, the clear and noble goal, he felt a pang of longing so sharp it almost made him gasp. Did he make the right choice? Or was this just a consolation prize? A second-best option for the quirkless boy who couldn't cut it in the real world? The confidence he had so carefully built over the last few months began to crumble, eroded by the tide of his oldest and deepest insecurity. He was, and always would be, the boy on the outside looking in. The images in the orb began to waver, mirroring the turmoil in his mind. The crisp scenes of Yue blurred, tinged with the gray of his own doubt. He felt a heavy hand settle on his shoulder. "Your focus is failing," Wong said, his voice a low, steady anchor in Izuku's storm of emotion. "You are lost in the what-if. It is a dangerous, fruitless path for any mind, but for a sorcerer, it is a poison that can corrupt your will." Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, trying to sever the connection to the orb, but the images were burned into the back of his eyelids. Kaken's triumphant, explosive grin. Uraraka's cheerful, zero-gravity wave. All Might's booming laughter, a sound he hadn't realized he'd missed so acutely. I could have been there," Izuku whispered, the words raw with a grief he hadn't allowed himself to feel until now. "This was everything I ever wanted." Wong was silent for a moment, his hand still a firm, grounding presence on Izuku's shoulder. He did not offer empty platitudes or easy reassurances. Wong was a teacher, and he knew that some lessons could not be taught with words, but must be learned through the crucible of self-doubt. He finally spoke, his voice quiet but carrying the immense weight of his centuries of experience. "I was a farmer," he said. Izuku's eyes snapped open. He turned to look at Wong, shocked out of his self-pity. He had never once considered that the stoic, timeless Sorcerer Supreme had ever been anything else. "I was born in a small village, not far from here," Wong continued, his gaze distant, looking at the snow-capped peaks outside the window as if seeing a different landscape entirely. "My family had worked the same plot of land for generations. My life was preordained. I was to till the soil, marry a woman from a neighboring village, raise children, and teach them to till the same soil. It was a good life. A simple, honorable life." He paused, a flicker of an old, forgotten warmth in his eyes. I had a brother. He fell ill with a sickness the village healers could not cure. I watched him waste away. I was helpless. My hands, which could coax life from the earth, could do nothing to save him. The day he died, I felt a powerlessness as profound as any you have ever felt. He looked back at Izuku, his gaze piercing. It was then that a traveler came to my village. A woman in strange robes. She was a master of the mystic arts. The Ancient One. She told me that there were worlds beyond my village, powers beyond the strength of my arms. She offered me a choice. Stay, and live the life that was chosen for me, or leave, and learn to protect others from the helplessness that had consumed me. Wong's story hung in the air, a profound and unexpected revelation. He, too, had faced a crossroads. He had left a life behind. I chose this path, Wong said, his voice regaining its familiar, steely authority. I never saw my family again. I never married. I never had children. I sacrificed the life I was born to in order to embrace the one I chose. Do I regret it? Some days, in the quietest hours of the night, I remember the smell of the soil after a rain, and I wonder. But then I remember why I am here. He turned Izuku to face him, his grip on his shoulder firm. A hero's duty is to protect people. That is the beginning and the end of it. The uniform you wear, the powers you wield, the fame you may or may not acquire, those are all secondary to that one, fundamental purpose. He gestured towards the orb, where the images of Yue still flickered. Their path is a noble one. They will stand on the front lines. They will fight villains who rob banks and monsters who terrorize cities. They will be symbols, beacons of hope for the public to see. Theirs is the fight against the threats you can see. He then tapped his finger on Izuku's chest, right over his heart. Your path is different. You will not stand in the light. You will not have adoring fans or your face on merchandise. You will be a silent guardian. A secret protector. Your fight will be in the shadows, against threats that would shatter the minds of those brave heroes in an instant. You will fight the things that crawl between dimensions, the cosmic horrors that see humanity as little more than a fleeting snack. You will protect them, Midoriya. You will protect your friends, your mother, your entire world, and they will never, ever know it. Tell me, he asked, his voice a low, intense whisper, is that not a hero's work? The words resonated deep within Izuku's soul, a powerful, clarifying chord that silenced the discordant notes of his doubt. Wong was right. He had been so caught up in the aesthetics of heroism, the costumes, the fame, the public adoration embodied by All Might, that he had lost sight of the core principle. Protection. He had been offered a chance to protect his world on a scale he could never have dreamed of as a pro-hero. He looked back at the orb. He saw Kaken, so powerful, so confident. And he imagined a creature of pure thought, a being from the nightmare dimension, latching onto Kaken's explosive ego and turning his ambition into a world-ending rampage. Who would stop that? Not Eraserhead. Not even All Might. He saw Uraraka, so kind and cheerful. And he imagined a Soul Eater, an ethereal parasite, drawn to her bright spirit. Who would perform the arcane ritual of exorcism to save her? This was his role. This was his battlefield. Not a collapsed city block, but the fragile metaphysical boundaries of his reality. The melancholy, the longing, the bitter what if, it all evaporated, burned away by the white-hot intensity of this newfound purpose. His dream hadn't died. It hadn't been replaced. It had evolved. It had matured from a child's fantasy of being like All Might into an adult's understanding of true, selfless responsibility. His focus returned, stronger and sharper than ever before. He looked at the orb, no longer with longing, but with a fierce, protective determination. This was his home. These were his people, and he would be their shield, whether they knew it or not. He straightened up, his shoulders squared, his gaze firm. He met Wong's eyes, and for the first time, Wong saw not an apprentice, but a fellow guardian looking back at him. Thank you, Wong-sensei, Izuku said, his voice clear and steady, devoid of any of its previous wavering. I understand now. He deliberately turned his back on the orb of Agamotto and the tempting, painful images of the life he'd left behind. He faced his teacher, his master, his mentor, and his expression was one of pure, unwavering resolve. "Teach me how to create portals," he said, the request not a whim, but a demand born of his new conviction. "I want to be ready. I want to be ready to go wherever I'm needed, whenever I'm needed, to protect them." Wong looked at the boy before him, no, the young man, and he allowed himself a small, proud smile. The final test had been passed. The last great hurdle of the soul had been cleared. The boy had finally, truly, left his old life behind and embraced his new one. "Very well," Wong said, turning to lead the way out of the observatory. "The theory is complex, the physical strain immense. The first portal you open will likely be the size of a dinner plate, and lead to the inside of a closet 2 doors down. But we will begin." As Izuku followed his master out of the room, he didn't once look back at the orb. He didn't need to. He wasn't leaving his home behind anymore. He was learning how to build a door back to it, a door he could step through at a moment's notice when it needed him most. He was no longer a visitor in Kamartaj. He was an ambassador, an emissary, and one day, he would be a guardian. His training had truly begun.